It is 1908. The Hotel de Talleyrand in Paris has seen better days. Not the building itself. The building is immaculate, all gilded cornices and silk-hung corridors. But the marriage inside it has seen better days. On the second floor, the door to the Countess's private apartments has not opened properly in 3 years. Not to guests. Not to her children's nurses. Not, most significantly, to her husband, a man who holds one of the oldest titles in France and who has been spending the household's money, which is to say an American railroad fortune worth $300 million, with a speed that even he cannot entirely explain. The door opens, and there in the center of this magnificent, terrible arrangement, seated at a writing desk surrounded by legal correspondence, wearing a plain dark dress with none of the jewels the newspapers have been cataloging for 15 years, is Anna Gould. She is alive. She is, in fact, more alert than anyone in Paris has given her credit for. And she is not who they say she is. They say she is a robber baron's daughter who bought herself a count. They say she is an ugly duckling who purchased a swan. They say she was always only decorative, always only a transaction. But stay with us, because what the letters on that desk are about to reveal is something far stranger, far more devastating, and far more human than any of that. But before we get into that, this channel is trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this month. 1,000 people who believe that stories like this one deserve to be told carefully. Told honestly, told the way history actually felt. If this is the kind of story you came here for, hitting that subscribe button right now would mean more than you know. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to what we're building here. Now back to where we were, because what happened next changes everything. Chapter 1, The Inciting Incident. The correspondence on that desk was an archaeological site, a time capsule, a crime scene with no obvious crime, except perhaps the crime of a life so deeply managed, so precisely constructed, that even its architect seemed to have forgotten which parts had been chosen and which had been inherited, which walls she had built and which had simply grown up around her. The letters were from solicitors, from New York, from the executors of her brother George's estate, from her own American lawyers who had been quietly, patiently building a case for what would become the most expensive divorce settlement the French courts had ever processed. The jewels alone, the pearl ropes, the diamond stomacher that had reportedly once belonged to Marie Antoinette, would require 3 separate appraisers. But here is the thing about those jewels. Anna Gould had not chosen them. Not really. Every piece had been selected, commissioned, or approved by Count Boney de Castellane, her husband, who had an eye for beauty and a complete indifference to the concept of a budget that was not his own. In 9 years of marriage, Boney had spent approximately $34 million of Gould money. He had built a pink marble palace on the Avenue du Bois. He had thrown a party for 1,000 guests that cost $200,000 in a single evening. He had kept a lifestyle so extraordinary that even the French aristocracy, not an abstemious class, had watched with something approaching vertigo. And Anna had paid for all of it. The question was, why? Chapter 2, True Origins. To understand why, you have to go back to Jay Gould, which is a place most people would prefer not to go. Jay Gould was not liked. This is almost too gentle a way to put it. He was called the most hated man in America, a distinction he held with some consistency from approximately 1867 until his death in 1892. He had made his fortune by means that his contemporaries found distasteful, even in an era that was not especially squeamish about the accumulation of capital. He manipulated railroads. He cornered gold markets. He bought newspapers to destroy his enemies and politicians to protect himself. And he raised his children in the knowledge that the world would never quite forgive them for being his. Anna Gould was born in 1875, the 4th of 6 children, and she was, by the standards of the Gilded Age society, she was supposed to inhabit unprepossessing. The press said so. They said it openly, cruelly, in the way that Gilded Age newspapers were permitted to discuss the appearances of heiresses as though they were livestock at a county fair. She was short. Her features were strong rather than delicate. She did not have the ethereal blondness that the fashion plates required. What she had was $80 million, inherited at 17 when Jay Gould died of tuberculosis, still unloved, still fighting. She was right that the money would open doors. She just hadn't anticipated the price. Chapter 3, The Architecture of the Arrangement. Count Boniface de Castellane was 28 years old when he arrived in New York in 1894, and he was, everyone agreed, extraordinarily beautiful. He had the kind of face that portrait painters requested, narrow and precise, with a manner so carefully cultivated that it had become, for all practical purposes, indistinguishable from character. He also had debts, significant ones. The de Castellane family name was among the oldest in France, and like many of the oldest names in France, it was attached to a pile of stones that cost more to maintain than the family's remaining income could sustain. Boney understood the geometry of his situation with perfect clarity. He needed an heiress, and the American market for titles was, in the 1890s, a seller's market. Anna was not his first choice. Several other heiresses had been approached. Several said no. Whether Anna said yes because she had fallen genuinely in love with that narrow, precise face, or because she understood, at 19, that a title would do what $80 million alone could not, and open the very oldest rooms in European society, is a question she never answered directly. What we know is this. They married in April 1895, in a ceremony the newspapers covered as though it were a coronation. 1,200 guests. Orange blossoms shipped from the south of France. Her dress, of white satin and Brussels lace, reportedly weighed 40 pounds. The exchange had been made. Chapter 4. The Pink Palace. The smell of the Palais Rose, that pink marble mansion Boney built on the Avenue du Bois de Boulogne, was extraordinary in the early years. Not merely pleasant. Extraordinary in the way that a very specific kind of excess becomes its own atmosphere, containing within its rooms a stratigraphy of ambition, of fresh-cut flowers replaced daily, of beeswax candles and 7-branched candelabra, of the particular dry warmth of a house heated beyond comfort to accommodate a man who required perfection in all things. Boney entertained with a ferocity that was almost artistic. The Bal de Roses in 1897, 3,000 guests, the garden lit by 20,000 Venetian lanterns, a fountain running with champagne, was discussed in the European press for weeks. He had a gift, an undeniable and genuine gift, for the theater of wealth, for arranging human beings and candlelight and silk and music into compositions that made observers feel they were witnessing history. They were witnessing history, just not the history Boney intended to make. Anna moved through these evenings in her jewels, which were spectacular, and in a quiet that contemporaries sometimes misread as contentment. She had hired tutors. She was teaching herself French with the focused determination she applied to everything that could be studied. She was learning year by year and party by party precisely how French aristocratic society worked, who held real power, and who merely performed it. She was taking notes. Chapter 5. The Education of an Heiress. What the society columns never adequately captured was the quality of Anna Gould's intelligence. The columns preferred to focus on the jewels, the gowns, the guest lists, the number of footmen in livery at any given event. They described her as quiet, as modest, occasionally as dull. One French society chronicler wrote that she was the least interesting person in any room she entered. And this line has been repeated often enough that it has hardened into received wisdom. But the lawyers knew better. The financial managers who dealt with the American accounts knew better. The servants who managed the household on a day-to-day basis, while Boney devoted himself to aesthetics, knew better. Anna had been, since approximately 1899, the operational intelligence of the entire enterprise. She had been corresponding directly with the New York trustees. She had been quietly documenting expenditures. She had been learning, without drama or announcement, exactly what her legal options were under both American and French law. By 1904, she had 3 children, a pink marble palace she had not wanted, a husband who had spent the equivalent of a small nation's annual budget on parties, and a file of evidence that would have impressed a barrister. She had also, somewhere in the management of all this, met Prince Hélie de Talleyrand-Périgord. A quieter man, a more solvent one. She had not, yet, decided what to do about that. Chapter 6. The Thing They Found. As the investigators, the lawyers, and ultimately the French civil courts began to pull apart the financial life of Anna Gould and Boney de Castellane, they found that the closer they looked, the stranger things became. And the strangest of all the strange things they found was this. The $34 million was not the whole of it. Boney had been, in addition to his spectacular public expenditures, conducting a secondary financial operation so baroque in its complexity that it had required the active cooperation of several bankers, 2 family members, and a network of vendors who had been systematically overbilling the Gould accounts for years and splitting the difference. There were payments to individuals whose relationship to the household was never clearly established. There were artworks purchased in Anna's name that had never arrived at any property she owned. There were, in the dry language of the court documents, irregularities of an ongoing and systematic nature. The word the French press eventually settled on was spoliation, plundering. But here is what the court documents cannot tell you, and what the lawyers who handled the case took, in some instances, to their graves. Anna had known. Not everything, but enough. She had known for at least 3 years before she filed, and she had spent those 3 years not in despair, but in preparation. She had been building the case herself. She had been, in the language of her father's world, making a market. Chapter 7, The Calculation. Why wait? That is the question that makes the whole architecture visible. Anna Gould waited because she was her father's daughter, and Jay Gould had understood, better than almost anyone of his generation, that timing is not merely a tactical consideration in these matters. It is the entire game. If she had filed in 1902, Boney's lawyers would have framed her as a hysterical American woman unable to comprehend the requirements of French aristocratic life. If she had filed in 1904, the sympathies of the French court, no reliable instrument at the best of times, might have been enlisted on behalf of the injured nobility rather than the injured wife. She filed in 1906, by which point she had 3 years of documented financial irregularities, the testimony of household staff, the correspondence of her own bankers, and the very quiet, very steady presence of the Prince de Talleyrand waiting in the background as proof that her dissatisfaction was not a nervous complaint, but a concluded judgment. The Countess de Castellane became Anna Gould again on May 23, 1906. The settlement required Boney to relinquish claims on the American fortune. The Palais Rose, which she had paid for, she let him keep. It cost her less than continuing to fund the man. She married Healy de Talleyrand Perigord 2 years later. The newspapers were furious that she seemed, if anything, calm. Chapters 8. What was left? The second marriage was quieter. This is the word everyone uses, and it carries within it an entire judgment about what Anna had been, what she had survived, and what she had decided to prioritize in the years that remained. She and Healy were, by contemporary accounts, genuinely companionable. They shared an interest in French history, in the management of the Talleyrand estates, in the raising of her children from the first marriage, who remained, despite everything, intermittently attached to their father's glamour. But something had calcified in Anna during the Castellane years, and it did not soften with the second marriage's comparative peace. She became, in the decades after 1908, increasingly private. Not reclusive. She continued to appear in society, to manage her philanthropic interests, to correspond with the American family members who were themselves navigating the dissolution of the Gould fortune through a new generation of decisions and dispersals. But the quality of her presence had changed. She occupied rooms differently. There was something in the way she moved through the social obligations of a wealthy Frenchwoman of her generation. A precision, a measured distance, that observers found, depending on their disposition, either admirable or unsettling. The woman who had taught herself French from a grammar book in a pink marble palace while her husband threw the ball de roses was still there. She had simply stopped performing her own amazement at the world. She had paid too much for the education to be surprised by any of it. Chapters 9. The Point of No Return. The lie, if we must call it that, and perhaps we must, was in the end no more complicated than this. I am not where I came from. I am where I am going. Jay Gould's daughter had purchased a title, absorbed a culture, learned a language, survived a systematic financial predation, rebuilt her legal position from inside the wreckage of a spectacularly failed marriage, and emerged on the other side as something that American society had no adequate category for. A self-made aristocrat who had made herself twice over, first through inheritance and then through sheer, documented, legally admissible will. But survival at that scale has a cost that the balance sheets cannot capture. Somewhere in the 15 years between the wedding and the divorce, between the orange blossoms and the court documents, Anna Gould had lost the ability to be known. Not merely recognized, but known. She had become too legible as a symbol. The heiress who bought a count, the count who spent her fortune, the woman who outlasted them both. Every room she entered had already decided what she was. The performance and the person had merged so completely that there was no longer a meaningful difference between the daughter of the most hated man in America and the woman she had constructed in that daughter's place. And the only honest thing left to do was to close the door on both. She did. She lived quietly in France until 1961, outlasting nearly everyone who had an opinion about her. The archives remember. The jewels were dispersed. The Pink Palace still stands. If this story made you think about what survival costs, about who gets remembered, and how, about the distance between what history writes about women and what women were actually doing, then subscribe. There are more rooms like this one, more closed doors, more archives that remember what the headlines chose to forget. We'll see you in the next one.